For years, Dirk Bogarde appeared to be the kind of actor whose life existed comfortably within the glow of admiration. Audiences felt they understood him simply by watching him move across the screen, by seeing the calm confidence that defined his presence. His polished exterior suggested a man who thrived effortlessly in the public eye, someone for whom fame felt less like a burden and more like a natural extension of who he was. Yet behind that familiar image lay another reality, a life carefully folded away from the gaze of millions. The distance between the man the world believed him to be and the man he truly was grew steadily, shaped by silence and the necessity of discretion. What he carried privately was not scandalous, but deeply human, too vulnerable to expose in an era that demanded perfection. And as time passed, the divide between his two worlds became a story in itself, a story the public sensed but never understood. What was the part of his life that could never step into the light, and why did Dirk Bogarde spend so long protecting it from even those who admired him most? Dirk Bogarde's rise to prominence unfolded with a quiet inevitability, the kind that comes when talent aligns perfectly with its moment in history. He emerged at a time when British cinema longed for a leading man who embodied refinement, restraint, and intelligence, and he offered all of that with a natural ease. His early performances revealed a depth that set him apart, a mastery of subtle emotion that made even the simplest scenes feel charged with unspoken meaning. Audiences gravitated toward him not because he was loud or flamboyant, but because he carried a stillness that commanded attention. As his filmography expanded, so did his influence. His name began appearing in bold letters on posters. His face became a staple of magazines, and his films consistently drew crowds who believed he could elevate any story. Directors trusted him to bring complexity to roles that might have otherwise fallen flat, while critics praised the intelligence that guided every choice he made on screen. To the public, he was not just a star. He was a symbol of cinematic elegance, the kind of actor who defined an era. But beneath the admiration, there was a growing tension. The more the world celebrated him, the more confined he became within the image they adored. And though no one noticed at the time, that image was beginning to overshadow the man who created it. Before Dirk Bogarde became a revered figure in British cinema, he was a young man quietly searching for a place where he could reshape himself. Acting offered that possibility. The theater became his first refuge, a world where he could slip into characters that felt freer than the life he lived offstage. His early performances were modest, but they carried a nuance that hinted at something deeper. Even in those beginnings, there was a restraint in his expression, a deliberate softness that made audiences watch him more closely, sensing layers beneath the surface. His path was not without hesitation. There were moments when he questioned whether he belonged in the industry at all, moments when the uncertainty of the profession nearly pushed him in another direction. But a single defining performance shifted everything. It wasn't just that critics praised him, it was that, for the first time, the industry saw the richness of what he could convey. From that turning point, his trajectory changed. Opportunities grew, the roles expanded in scope, and the young actor who once doubted himself stepped into a new reality, one where the world began to take notice and where the foundations of his eventual stardom were firmly laid. As Dirk Bogarde's reputation solidified and he became one of Britain's most sought-after leading men, the machinery of fame began shaping his existence in ways the public never saw. The studios treated him not as an individual with inner conflicts and private longings, but as a carefully sculpted figure who needed to embody every ideal the era demanded. Every detail, from the cadence of his voice to the way he carried himself in photographs, was monitored, refined, and molded to preserve a flawless image. With each passing year, the character he played in real life grew further from the person he truly was. To maintain this curated exterior, Bogarde learned to silence parts of himself that didn't align with the narrative his industry needed. Personal relationships were tucked into the shadows, emotions were tempered, and genuine vulnerability was hidden behind a calm, composed mask. What the world interpreted as elegance often came from years of self-discipline, from a quiet decision to sacrifice authenticity in exchange for acceptance. In private, he navigated a life that felt increasingly narrow, one where the cost of slipping out of character could jeopardize everything he had built. At the core of this hidden struggle was a bond that sustained him, a partnership that gave his life its deepest meaning, yet could never be acknowledged under the bright scrutiny of his fame. Protecting that connection became both his solace and his burden, shaping the unspoken sacrifices that defined his most successful years. As Dirk Bogarde stepped into the most challenging phase of his career, the roles he chose began to mirror the private storms he could never articulate. His performances grew darker, more introspective, as if he were quietly inserting fragments of himself into every character who grappled with longing, repression, or internal conflict. Films like The Servant Accident and Death in Venice were hailed as masterpieces, but behind the applause was an unspoken truth. These roles allowed him to express emotions he was forbidden to reveal in his own life. Audiences admired his subtlety without realizing they were witnessing a man channeling what he carried in silence. Away from the screen, his inner world was tightening. His journals and letters from those years spoke of a weariness that clung to him, of thoughts he couldn't shed, of a quiet sense of being trapped between the life he lived and the life he longed for. Friends saw change in him, moments of drifting silence, a heaviness behind his polite smile, a growing distance that seemed impossible to bridge. Even as critics praised his artistic boldness, those close to him sensed the toll it was taking. The companionship he relied on became even more essential, serving as the one steady presence in a life defined by expectations and restraint. But not even that unwavering support could undo decades spent living behind carefully drawn lines. As the spotlight dimmed, Dirk Bogarde was left confronting the echoes of a life divided, caught between the man he showed the world and the truth he guarded so fiercely. In his later years, Dirk Bogarde quietly withdrew from the fast-moving world that had once relied on his presence. He chose a life anchored in stillness, surrounded by familiar rooms, quiet mornings, and the comfort of writing an act that allowed him to speak in ways he never could during his most public decades. The urgency of fame faded, replaced by a fragile calm that he both welcomed and feared. His home became a sanctuary, a place where he could move at his own pace and allow the weight of his memories to settle without performing for anyone. The companionship that had steadied him for so much of his life remained close, offering him a kind of gentleness that fame had denied. Through illness, uncertainty, and the slow dimming of physical strength, that bond became the anchor that kept him grounded. Yet the silence around their relationship persisted, echoing the compromises he had carried since the height of his career. Even in these final years, truth and discretion remained intertwined. Among the manuscripts and personal writings he left behind, there was one final piece he deliberately withheld. Those who glimpsed it spoke only of its intimacy, a chapter too revealing, too honest, perhaps too painful for the world to see. And when Dirk Bogarde finally departed, he did so surrounded by the quiet he had chased for so long, leaving behind a life marked not only by brilliance, but by the secrets he chose to protect until the end. In the years after Dirk Bogarde's passing, the world began revisiting his body of work with new eyes that now recognized the delicate tension woven through his performances. Those quiet pauses, the guarded expressions, the emotional restraint that once seemed stylistic, suddenly felt like glimpses into the inner life he had fought so hard to keep hidden. His roles no longer appeared simply masterful. They appeared personal, shaped by truths he was never allowed to voice. His films aged into something more than art. They became a map of a man navigating the fragile line between duty and desire. His published memoirs revealed his eloquence and reflective mind, yet it was the unpublished chapter that drew the heaviest curiosity. Preserved but unread by the world, it became a symbol of the privacy he had protected above all else. That missing piece, left intentionally unfinished in the public eye, became the most haunting part of his story. It suggested that the silence he carried throughout his life was not a void but a choice, one shaped by fear, loyalty, and the rules of a time that denied him freedom. Today, Dirk Bogarde is remembered not only as a luminary of British cinema, but as a man whose life invites compassion. His legacy is defined as much by what he gave to the screen as by the quiet truths he could never reveal. In the space between his performances and his silences, people continue to search for understanding, and in that search, his memory endures with striking clarity. Dirk Bogarde's life remains a testament to the delicate balance between brilliance and restraint. His career illuminated screens for decades, yet the man behind that illumination lived in spaces the world rarely looked toward. He mastered the art of conveying emotion with quiet precision, but that same quietness concealed the truths he never felt free to express. His public life was a tapestry of acclaim and elegance. His private life, a landscape shaped by silence, loyalty, and unspoken longing. The contrast between these two worlds forms the essence of his story, one marked not by scandal, but by the quiet courage of a man navigating a life he was never allowed to fully claim. As time passes, his legacy invites reflection. It reminds us that fame can reveal as much as it hides, and that the brightest figures often carry unseen burdens beneath their composed exteriors. Dirk Bogarde left behind performances of rare depth writings that revealed his thoughtful mind and unanswered questions that still echo long after his final curtain fell. His silence was not emptiness. It was a language, one that speaks even louder now. What lingers with you after hearing his story, and if he could share the truth he guarded so closely, what do you imagine he would want the world to know? Thank you for being here, for listening, and for keeping his memory alive. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to continue exploring the hidden stories behind the icons we thought we knew. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.